One man's quiet dignity becomes the catalyst for a powerful change on a prestigious university campus. How will Marvin's story inspire an entire community? And what happens when one unexpected ally steps in to demand justice? Don't miss this inspiring tale of resilience and redemption. Subscribe now and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Marvin Reed knelt on the cold tile floor of the university's grand hall, carefully scrubbing away the remnants of a spilled latte. His knees ached from years of work, but he moved with practiced precision, his face calm, despite the occasional snickers and murmurs of passing students. The prestigious Silver Valley University buzzed with life, a sharp contrast to Marvin's quiet determination. "Hey, Reed," a sharp voice cut through the noise. Marvin looked up, his hands still holding the damp cloth. Chad Davis, the loud and entitled son of a prominent donor, leaned against the marble banister with a smirk plastered on his face. Behind him, a group of equally smug students watched, their laughter barely contained. Marvin offered a polite nod. "Good morning, Mr. Davis." "Morning," Chad scoffed. "It's almost noon, Reed. But I guess time doesn't matter when your job is just to clean up after the rest of us." The group erupted in laughter as Marvin turned back to his task, ignoring the insult. Years of dealing with such behavior had taught him that silence was his best defense. He wasn't here for approval, he was here for his family. Marvin's thoughts drifted to home. His wife, Eleanor, was bedridden, battling an illness that had drained their savings. Their two kids, Jenna and Marcus, were bright and ambitious, and Marvin's dream was to see them graduate college, a goal he hoped to achieve by keeping his head down and working hard. "You missed the spot," Chad called out, tossing his empty soda cup onto the floor. It bounced, spilling the last of its sugary contents near Marvin's freshly cleaned area. Marvin inhaled deeply, resisting the urge to respond. Instead, he reached for his cleaning supplies, his hands steady but his heart heavy. The group's taunts grew louder, but he blocked them out, focusing instead on the thought of Jenna's laugh and Marcus's determination. "Why do you even bother?" Reed, Chad sneered, stepping closer. "You think anyone here sees you as more than a stain on this place?" A passing student paused, her expression uneasy. Emma Green, a second-year journalism major, had seen this scene play out too many times. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone, angling it discreetly to capture the interaction. "Come on, Chad," one of the other students urged, sounding bored. "Let's go." "The guy's not even reacting. It's no fun." Chad sighed dramatically. "Fine. Guess I'll leave you to your kingdom of mop buckets, Reed." The group moved on, their laughter fading into the distance. Marvin exhaled, letting the tension leave his shoulders. He finished his work and stood, his joints protesting the movement. Gathering his supplies, he glanced around, ensuring the hall was spotless before heading toward the janitor's closet. Inside the small, dimly lit room, Marvin placed his tools in their proper spots. He leaned against the wall, his eyes closing briefly. The day was only halfway through, but it already felt endless. A knock on the door startled him. He opened it to find Emma standing there, her expression hesitant but determined. "Mr. Reed?" she asked. "Yes, Miss," Marvin replied, his voice cautious. "I just wanted to say ... I'm sorry for what they did. It's not right." Marvin smiled, a faint but genuine curve of his lips. "Thank you, but there's no need to worry about me. I've dealt with worse." Emma frowned, her resolve hardening. "It's not okay. People shouldn't be treated like this. I'm working on a piece for the campus blog, and I'd love to include your story if you're willing." Marvin's smile faded. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking for attention." "It's not just about you," Emma pressed gently. "It's about showing people what's happening here. You deserve respect, Mr. Reed. People need to see the man behind the mop." Marvin hesitated, the weight of her words settling on him. He had always stayed in the background, believing that enduring quietly was his only option. But something in Emma's earnest gaze made him wonder if sharing his story could do more than just shine a light on his struggles. It could inspire others. "I'll think about it," Marvin finally said. Emma nodded, her expression softening. "That's all I can ask. Thank you." As she walked away, Marvin closed the door and leaned against it, his mind racing. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a world where he wasn't just the janitor, where his children didn't have to carry the burden of his sacrifices, and where dignity wasn't something he had to fight for every day. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights in the janitor's closet was Marvin's only companion as he prepared for another long evening. He glanced at the faded photo of his family taped to the inside of the door. It was his silent mantra, keep going for them. But tonight, things would take a darker turn. The grand rotunda of Silver Valley University was bustling with activity as Marvin methodically cleaned the polished floors. Students mingled, their voices echoing against the marble walls, completely oblivious to the man quietly ensuring their space remained pristine. Chad Davis and his entourage appeared again, their laughter slicing through the chatter. Marvin tensed instinctively. He didn't have to turn around to know it was them. "Hey, Reed, still pretending this is your palace?" Chad's voice rang out, dripping with mockery. Marvin ignored the comment, focusing instead on the streak on the floor that refused to disappear. He scrubbed harder, but the sound of approaching footsteps made his heart sink. "You're doing it all wrong," Old Man Chad said, snatching the mop from Marvin's hands. "Here, let me show you." Before Marvin could protest, Chad thrust the mop into a nearby trash can, soaking it in leftover soda and coffee. With a dramatic flourish, he pulled it out and smeared the concoction across the floor Marvin had just cleaned. "Oops," Chad said with a grin, holding up his hands in mock innocence. "My bad." The group erupted in laughter, their voices bouncing off the high ceilings. Marvin clenched his fists but remained silent, his mind racing with ways to de-escalate. "What's the matter, Reed? Cat, got your tongue?" Chad pressed, leaning closer. "Or are you just too scared to fight back?" A couple of students passing by slowed their steps, curiosity drawing their attention. Among them was Emma Green, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She had been following Chad's antics ever since their last encounter and had started documenting his harassment. Tonight was no exception. Marvin straightened, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I'm just here to do my job, Mr. Davis. Please step aside." Chad snorted. "Your job? Your job is to clean up after us. That's all you'll ever be good for." One of the other boys in the group, a wiry freshman eager to impress, stepped forward and tipped over Marvin's bucket of water. The murky liquid spread across the floor, pooling at Marvin's feet. "Oops," again the freshman said, his grin faltering when Marvin turned his gaze on him. It wasn't anger in Marvin's eyes, but a quiet strength that made the boy shift uncomfortably. "Enough," Marvin said quietly. "You've had your fun." Chad's smirk deepened. "Fun? We're just getting started." He grabbed a spray bottle from Marvin's cart and began spraying it wildly, dousing the walls and nearby furniture. The other boys followed suit, grabbing cleaning supplies and creating chaos. Marvin's chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Stop this," Marvin said firmly. "You're destroying property." "Who cares?" Chad said, tossing the bottle aside. "It's your job to fix it, right?" Emma stepped closer, her phone now raised. "I care. And so will the administration when they see this." Chad froze for a moment before spinning around to face her. "What are you doing, Green? Put that phone away." Emma didn't flinch. "No, everyone deserves to see how you treat people." Marvin looked at her, a mix of gratitude and worry. The situation was spiraling out of control. Chad stormed toward Emma, his face red. "Give me the phone now." "No," Emma said, her voice steady. "If you touch me, you'll only make things worse for yourself." The other students, sensing the tension, began to back away. Chad hesitated, his confidence wavering under Emma's glare and the murmurs of onlookers growing louder. He turned back to Marvin, frustration etched on his face. "This isn't over," Reed, Chad spat. "You're going to regret this." The group retreated, leaving behind a mess of spilled water, overturned supplies, and a shaken silence. Emma approached Marvin, lowering her phone. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Marvin nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Thank you. But you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Emma replied firmly. "Someone has to." Marvin offered a small, weary smile before turning to assess the damage. Emma watched him for a moment before stepping forward to help. Together, they began cleaning the mess, their actions a quiet defiance against the chaos Chad and his group had left behind. As the night wore on, Marvin couldn't shake Chad's parting words. He knew the young man wasn't done, and the next confrontation might not end so cleanly. The hum of the campus quieted as dusk settled over Silver Valley University. Marvin worked methodically in the library, pushing his cart of cleaning supplies between the towering bookshelves. This was his favorite part of the day, when the chaos of students dwindled and the world felt more manageable. He could almost forget the taunts and the messes left for him as cruel jokes. Almost. Mr. Reed, a familiar voice called from behind. Marvin turned to see Emma Green, the young journalist who had stood up to Chad. Her determined expression was softened by a warm smile. "Miss Green," he greeted with a nod. "What brings you here this late?" Emma adjusted the strap of her bag, her camera peeking out from its open zipper. "I've been thinking about our conversation. I know you said you didn't want attention," but she hesitated. "People need to know what's happening to you, what's happening on this campus." Marvin sighed, leaning against his cart. And what good would that do? They'll just find new ways to make life harder. Or maybe, Emma countered, stepping closer, it'll force the administration and the students to see the truth. To see you, not just as the janitor but as a man with a story. Marvin studied her, the lines of weariness on his face deepening. "And what is it you think they'd see?" Emma pulled out her camera and motioned to the small study table nearby. "Sit with me. Let's talk." Reluctantly, Marvin agreed, easing himself into the chair. Emma turned on her camera and pressed record, her voice gentle yet firm. "Let's start with your name and why you're here at Silver Valley." He hesitated, but something in Emma's sincerity moved him to speak. "My name is Marvin Reed. I've been working here for 15 years. Started as a temporary gig, but life had other plans. My wife got sick, and my kids'" voice softened, his eyes flickering with pride. "They've got dreams, and I want to see them come true." Emma nodded, her encouragement wordless. Marvin continued, his words flowing more freely now. He spoke of his late nights cleaning the messes others didn't notice, and the small joys that kept him going, a smile from a kind student, a quiet moment to himself in the library. When he mentioned the bullying, Emma leaned forward, her voice steady. "And how does that affect you?" Marvin paused, his hands clasped tightly. "It doesn't feel good, I'll tell you that. But I've learned to endure. My father used to say, dignity is the armor of the humble. I try to live by that, even when it's hard." Emma's brow furrowed, her fingers still on the camera. "It shouldn't have to be like this, Mr. Reed. People should treat you with the respect you've earned." Marvin looked down, his voice quiet. "Respect is a luxury not everyone gets to have." Emma's jaw tightened. "That's going in the article." The next day, Emma's story hit the campus blog. Titled "The Man Behind the Mop, Marvin Reed's Quiet Battle for Dignity," it painted a vivid picture of the man most students barely noticed. It described his struggles, his resilience, and the systemic disregard for workers like him. The accompanying photos showed Marvin's tired yet kind face, his hands worn from years of labor. The reaction was immediate. Students shared the story across social media, and conversations began brewing in lecture halls and dorm rooms. Many were outraged at Chad's behavior, their whispers turning into open criticism. Emma found herself bombarded with messages of support for Marvin. Some students even started a GoFundMe to help his family. The donations poured in faster than anyone expected. Marvin, however, remained skeptical. When Emma approached him with the news, his expression was wary. "I appreciate what you've done, but I've seen how things can change when the attention dies down." Emma smiled gently. "This time feels different. People are listening. They care." As the days passed, Marvin began to notice the subtle shifts. Students greeted him with respect, some even stopping to thank him. Faculty members started acknowledging his presence in meetings and hallways. But the most unexpected moment came when Marcus, Marvin's teenage son, ran into the house one evening, holding his phone high. "Dad, you're trending on Twitter." Marvin blinked, his brow furrowed. "On what?" Marcus laughed, showing him the screen. "Your story, Dad. It's everywhere. People are calling you a hero." Marvin stared at the screen, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He wasn't used to being seen, let alone celebrated. A quiet voice in his mind whispered that it wouldn't last, but another voice, one he hadn't heard in a long time, told him to embrace it. For the first time in years, Marvin allowed himself to feel hope. Not for the fleeting attention or the donations, but for the possibility that his children might grow up in a world that valued people like him. Marvin wheeled his cart through the dimly lit corridors of Silver Valley University late that evening. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed softly, the only sound accompanying his steady footsteps. He'd seen the story Emma published. He'd heard the murmurs of students, the polite greetings from faculty. For a brief moment it had felt like things might change. But Chad Davis wasn't about to let that happen. Earlier that day, Marvin had entered the janitor's break room to find his locker vandalized. Red spray paint smeared across the metal door, spelling out the word loser in jagged, dripping letters. The lock had been cut, and his belongings were scattered across the floor, his uniform shirt shredded, his thermos dented, and the family photo he kept inside torn in half. Marvin knelt to gather his things, his chest tightening as he picked up the ruined photo. The smiling faces of Eleanor, Marcus, and Jenna stared back at him, their torn halves like a mirror of how he felt inside. "Need a hand," Mr. Reed, a voice said from behind. Marvin turned to see Emma standing there, her face pale with concern. She knelt beside him, helping him collect his scattered belongings. "Who did this?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Marvin didn't reply immediately. He folded the torn photo carefully, placing it in his pocket. "Does it matter? It's just things." "It matters," Emma said firmly. They crossed a line. Marvin sighed, standing and brushing the dust off his pants. "This isn't new, Miss Green. People like me, we're used to this. What's important is not letting it break you." Emma frowned, her hands tightening into fists. "I'm not letting this go." Before Marvin could protest, she stormed out of the room, determination blazing in her eyes. He stood there for a moment, his heart heavy. Emma's resolve was admirable, but he knew Chad's group wouldn't back down easily. That evening, Marvin found himself cleaning the auditorium after an event. The rows of chairs were empty, and the stage lights cast long shadows across the polished floor. As he worked, he heard the familiar echo of laughter from the entryway. Chad and his crew strolled in, their presence as imposing as ever. Chad clapped slowly, the sound reverberating in the vast space. "Well, look who it is," Chad said, his tone mocking. "Silver Valley's newest celebrity." Marvin straightened, gripping his mop tightly. "I have work to do, Mr. Davis. If you don't mind, please leave." Chad ignored him, striding down the aisle until he was inches from Marvin. The others followed, encircling him like predators toying with their prey. "You think you're some kind of hero now," Chad sneered. "Just because some dumb blog post went viral? Newsflash, Reed, this is my school. People like you don't belong here." Marvin's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He tried to step past Chad, but another boy blocked his path, shoving him back. "Not so fast," Chad said, grinning. "We're not done with you." They began to mock him, their voices blending into a cruel chorus. They tipped over his cart, scattering supplies across the floor. One of them grabbed the mop bucket and hurled it, the soapy water splashing across the stage. Marvin clenched his fists, his body trembling with the effort to stay calm. He thought of his family, of Eleanor's warm smile, of Marcus and Jenna's dreams. He couldn't afford to lose his temper, not now, not ever. Chad leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. "No one cares about you, Reed. You're just a janitor. A nobody." "Stop," a voice rang out, sharp and commanding. All heads turned to see Emma standing in the doorway, her phone held high, recording every second of the encounter. Her eyes blazed with fury. "Get out," she said, her voice steady. "I'm recording everything. If you don't leave now, the whole world is going to see exactly who you are." Chad faltered, his confident smirk wavering. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me?" Emma stepped closer, unflinching. "I don't need them to believe me. I just need them to see this. You've already dug your own grave." For a moment, silence filled the room. The other boys shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Chad's bravado cracked under the weight of Emma's unwavering gaze. "Let's go," one of them muttered, tugging at Chad's arm. Reluctantly, Chad stepped back, his expression dark. "This isn't over," he hissed before turning and storming out, the others trailing behind him. When the door slammed shut, Emma lowered her phone and rushed to Marvin's side. "Are you okay?" Marvin nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging. "I'm fine. Thank you." Emma's hands trembled as she pocketed her phone. "They can't keep getting away with this." "They won't," Marvin said, his voice quiet but firm. "Bullies never win in the end." As they worked together to clean the mess, Marvin felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that, even in the face of cruelty, there were people willing to stand up for what was right. The following morning, Marvin arrived at the university feeling the weight of the previous night's events. His steps were slower, his usual quiet resolve chipped away by exhaustion and worry. Though Emma's bravery had sent Chad and his crew packing, Marvin knew the battle was far from over. As he wheeled his cart into the main hall, he noticed something unusual: silence. The normally bustling campus seemed eerily subdued, clusters of students whispering to one another. Their gazes followed him, some with curiosity, others with guilt. Marvin felt exposed, as though the invisible wall he had used to separate himself from their world had crumbled overnight. He glanced at the bulletin board near the entrance and froze. Pinned among the flyers for club meetings and events was a large printout of Emma's latest blog post, "The Bullies of Silver Valley, a Janitor's Story." Beneath the headline was a freeze frame from Emma's video, showing Chad towering over Marvin, his expression cruel and mocking. Marvin's chest tightened. He turned away, hurrying toward the janitor's closet, but his path was blocked by Emma, her face a mix of determination and concern. "Mr. Reed," she began, her tone apologetic. "I didn't mean for it to blow up like this, but—" "It's fine," Marvin interrupted gently. "I know you're trying to help. But you don't look fine," Emma pressed. "The administration is holding a meeting this afternoon to address everything. They want you there." Marvin's stomach dropped. "Me? Why?" "Because they can't ignore this anymore," Emma said. "People are finally paying attention. You deserve to have a voice in this." Marvin opened his mouth to protest, but the conviction in Emma's eyes stopped him. He sighed, nodding reluctantly. "All right, I'll be there." By the time the meeting began, word had spread across campus. The auditorium was packed, with students, faculty, and even local media crammed into the rows. Marvin sat near the front, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He felt out of place amid the sea of polished faces, but Emma's reassuring presence beside him kept him grounded. The room quieted as Dean Wallace took the stage, his expression grave. "Good afternoon, everyone. We're here today to address a serious matter that has come to light regarding the treatment of one of our staff members, Mr. Marvin Reed." Polite applause broke out, but Marvin barely heard it. His mind raced, his nerves frayed as the dean continued speaking about the university's commitment to creating an inclusive and respectful environment. "And now," Dean Wallace said, "I'd like to invite Mr. Reed to share his perspective." The room went silent as Marvin stood, his heart pounding. He stepped onto the stage, the microphone a looming presence before him. He gripped the podium, his voice trembling as he began. "I've worked here for 15 years, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "I came to this campus every day to do my job, to provide for my family, and to support my children's dreams. I didn't expect recognition or praise. I just wanted to work in peace." He paused, the weight of his words settling over the audience. "But over the years I've endured harassment, mockery, and disrespect. And not just from students, it's in the way people look at me, as though my worth is tied to the mop in my hands." Marvin's voice grew steadier as he continued. "Everyone deserves dignity, no matter their job or their circumstances. And if this university truly values its community, it needs to start by treating every member of that community with respect." The room erupted into applause, some students rising to their feet. Marvin stepped back, overwhelmed by the response. He hadn't realized how much his words would resonate. As he returned to his seat, Emma whispered, "You are amazing." Before Marvin could respond, a ripple of commotion spread through the auditorium. Heads turned toward the back of the room, where a tall, poised figure entered Oprah Winfrey. The room buzzed with shock and awe as she made her way to the stage, her presence commanding attention. Marvin froze, his mind racing. It had been decades since he last saw her, since the day he'd saved her from that car accident when he was just a teenager. He never imagined she would remember, let alone show up here. Oprah took the microphone, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "I came here today because of one man," she began, her voice strong. "A man who showed me kindness and courage when I needed it most." Her eyes found Marvin's, and she smiled warmly. "Mr. Reed, your actions changed my life. And now, it's time for this community to recognize the value of what you bring to theirs." The room erupted again, the applause deafening. Oprah turned to the dean, her tone resolute. "This university has an opportunity to lead by example. Let's ensure that no one staff, student, or faculty ever feels undervalued here again." Marvin sat in stunned silence as the crowd continued to cheer. For the first time, he felt truly seen, not just as a janitor, but as a man whose life and actions had made a difference. The news of Oprah's unexpected appearance at Silver Valley University spread like wildfire. Marvin became an overnight sensation, not just on campus but across the country. Clips of the event dominated social media, with hashtags like Respect for Reed and Dignity for All trending for days. Donations to the GoFundMe for Marvin's family skyrocketed, reaching an amount that Marvin could hardly fathom. Despite the whirlwind of attention, Marvin kept his routine as much as possible. He still showed up to work each day, mop and bucket in hand, determined not to let the fame distract him from what mattered most: his family and his integrity. A week after the auditorium meeting, Marvin received a formal invitation to a special assembly in his honor. He hesitated at first, uncomfortable with being in the spotlight. But Emma encouraged him, reminding him of the change his story was sparking. "You've earned this, Mr. Reed," she said with a smile. "Let them celebrate you." The auditorium was packed again, but this time the mood was different. The energy was one of admiration and gratitude. As Marvin stepped onto the stage, he was greeted by a standing ovation. Students, faculty, and even local residents cheered as he made his way to the microphone. Dean Wallace stepped forward, holding a plaque. "Mr. Reed," he began, his voice filled with respect, "you've taught us all an invaluable lesson about dignity, resilience, and the importance of kindness. On behalf of Silver Valley University, we present you with this award as a symbol of our gratitude." Marvin accepted the plaque with shaking hands, his heart full. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "This isn't just about me. It's about how we treat each other, how we see each other, how we see each other. If my story can inspire even one person to act with kindness and respect, then it's worth it." The applause was thunderous, but it wasn't the only surprise the day had in store. Oprah stepped forward again, her presence as commanding as ever. "Marvin," she said, her voice warm, "I've been thinking about how I can help honor your legacy and ensure your story reaches as many people as possible." She gestured toward the screen behind them, which lit up with the words, "The Reed Scholarship Fund." Oprah smiled at Marvin's stunned expression. "This fund will provide financial support to underprivileged students and children of university staff, ensuring that they have access to the education they deserve." Tears welled in Marvin's eyes as the crowd erupted in cheers. He shook Oprah's hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. This means more than I can say." The days that followed were a whirlwind of change. Chad Davis and his friends faced disciplinary action, including suspension, and the university implemented new policies to address harassment and workplace respect. Faculty and students organized initiatives to support staff, from appreciation events to mentorship programs. At home, the scholarship fund and donations allowed Marvin to finally breathe easier. Eleanor's medical expenses were covered, and Marcus and Jenna now had opportunities he never thought possible. For the first time in years, Marvin felt hope, not just for himself but for his family's future. One evening, as Marvin sat on the porch with Eleanor, watching the sunset, she reached for his hand. "You've always been a good man," she said softly. "Now the world knows it too." Marvin smiled, squeezing her hand. "I just did what I had to do." "No," Eleanor corrected gently. "You did what was right." The final act of Marvin's story came during Silver Valley University's commencement ceremony that spring. At the dean's invitation, Marvin addressed the graduating class. He stood before the crowd, the sun shining brightly overhead, and spoke from the heart. Life isn't about titles or wealth, he began. It's about how we treat one another, especially when no one else is watching. You have the power to make a difference in someone's life, never forget that. The crowd erupted into applause, the graduates rising to their feet. Marvin stepped back, his heart full as he took in the sea of faces before him. As the ceremony ended, Emma approached him, her camera slung over her shoulder. So she said, grinning, "How does it feel to be a legend?" Marvin chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm no legend, Emma, just a man trying to do right." Emma nodded, her expression softening. "Well, you've done more than that, Mr. Reed. You've changed lives." As Marvin walked away, the warmth of the crowd's applause still echoing in his ears, he felt something he hadn't in years: pride, not just in himself, but in the knowledge that his story had become more than he ever imagined. It was a testament to the power of resilience, the value of kindness, and the strength of standing tall, even in the face of adversity.